afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming out for this great event. The strategy, technology, weapon systems, people. All of them are critical for the military to achieve effectiveness. But without the right culture, all of those elements will be compromised. And with the right culture, and as General Bratton said earlier, with a shared determination of the team, they will be unstoppable. I'm Stephen Ponce. I'm the KPMG Space Force account lead, and I'll be the moderator for our first panel today on Guardian Ideal and Space Warfighting Mindset. Before we begin, and on behalf of KPMG and our DAF and Space Force account, I want to extend a big thanks to our co-host for today's event, the National Security Space Association. Next, let's give a warm welcome to our panelists for today. We are honored to have with us retired Lieutenant General Kevin McLaughlin, who throughout his military career was actively involved in shaping and influencing space warfighting culture, and into retirement has been a vocal champion and contributor to its evolution. Next, we have Chief Master Sergeant Jacob Simmons, Senior Enlisted Leader of the Space Operations Command, or SPOC. And lastly, we have Mr. Al Toso, Deputy Director of Space Delta I Training under the Space Training and Readiness Command, or STARCOM. To set the stage for today's discussion, the stand-up of the Space Force in December of 2019 was truly groundbreaking on so many levels. Not since 1947, with the establishment of the U.S. Air Force, has there been the opportunity to create an entirely new military service. An opportunity where its service members and leadership can create and instill a completely new identity, values, distinguishing behaviors, norms, rituals, symbolism, and affiliation when operating in a joint environment. In addition, the creation of the Space Force brought with it the recognition of space as a warfighting domain. Gone were the decades before where the Air Force Space Command operated in an uncongested and uncontested environment with little to no adversarial threats. And here today is the U.S. Space Force charged with organizing, training, and equipping Guardians to employ a space warfighting mindset to protect and defend our nation and our assets to, in, and from space. Defining and managing organizational culture is not an easy task by any means. So we'd like to start by giving a significant kudos to S1 for publishing in September of 2021 the Guardian Ideal, which set forth the core Guardian values which underpin Guardian culture and distinguishing behaviors. Also, a big nod to STARCOM for diving deep into Guardian culture and finding ways to reinforce Guardian identity, affiliation, and culture into its training and education processes. Over the past few years, we at KPMG have immersed ourselves in supporting Space Force with its culture journey. One question that has consistently popped up is about how Guardians can adopt a space warfighting mindset. For instance, as Space Force is on the path to becoming truly the first digital military service, how can Guardians embody a warrior ethos through digital means? Also, how can they embody that mindset while deployed or executing missions in place? How can Guardians operate with vigilance against known and emerging adversarial threats and as part of a larger warfighting enterprise, when many themselves will not handle a weapon or physically navigate within a battle space? Our panel today will start to enlighten us on these important topics and nuances, and I'll start by asking each of our panelists to define space warfighting mindset based on their own perspective. So I'll hand it over to Chief to expound on that for a few minutes here.
So good afternoon, and thank you each for spending some time with us. Really appreciate the opportunity to represent not only the Space Force, but in specific, the enlisted force. The command culture of having a command team is critical in the Space Force. And so this afternoon, you'll see senior enlisted leaders sitting along our senior officers and our senior civilians. This is representative of the team that it takes to lead within the Space Force. Earlier today, you heard it said that our Space Force is carved up almost in thirds when you think about the numbers of civilians, the officers, and the enlisted. And the representation of those, that demographic is important when we think about the culture. With nearly half, once we're at full strength being civilians, we have to think about how does that factor in to our Space Force warfighting culture. The topic that you bring up, guardian ideal and then space warfighting mindset are not diametrically opposed, right? These aren't competing things. Our guardian ideal, which really gives the Space Force a foundation for how we take care of our people, and a space warfighting mindset, which is the foundation for how we take care of our business, these things are complementary. They are two sides of the very same coin. Our guardians are looked at through both of these lenses. They're looked at it through at both of these angles, and they're expected to be able to merge both of these mediums together seamlessly, understanding the ideals and understanding our mindset. If you would look at it in a sense of our operational area, the things that we think about in our mission is our focus on our outer space. That's the way most of society will see the Space Force, is outer space. And that is our mission focus. But our mindset focus has to also include our inner space, the things that are in our area of immediate responsibility, our people, the environment, the ecosystem, the way that we establish an environment that produces people that can do great things, greater things than what we brought them in expecting that they would do. This particular Guardian Culture paper that you put out, really captures the question that you're asking beyond the core values, character, connection, commitment, and courage. What are the things that separate the Guardian? Because to be quite frank, those 4 words are good words that describe good people. And there are many people that embody the traits, characteristics of those core values: connection, commitment, courage, character. Those are good things for every person to have and aspire to as they move through life. But not every good person can be a great guardian. Every great guardian must first be a good person. So what's the delta? What's the delta between being a good person of those core values and being a great guardian with those core values? I would say that actualizing those core values is our inner space. That is what's in our space to do. The things that are within our outer space, the things that we have to project, is how do we operationalize those core values? And that is where the Guardian finds the space warfighting mindset, is in operationalizing the inner space.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Toso.
Yeah, so good afternoon, all. I want to thank NSSA and KPMG, my fellow panel members here, for this opportunity. El Toso, Space Delta 1. And it's interesting how the Space Force is organized, field comms. I'm sure everybody's given some thought to that, and how the deltas, particularly within STARCOM, are organized. Right, I flew out here from Santa Maria, California, Vandenberg Space Force Base, a long ways from the flagpole here. Right, that's deliberate. Right, we are out there focused day to day on training Guardians and other joint space warriors. And so it's interesting. We think every day about what does that mean? Not just making sure that, this Guardian is getting space fundamentals, history, policy, at that undergraduate level, taking some advanced space courses, whether it be orbital warfare, rendezvous proximity ops, space electronic warfare, space battle management. Yeah, you're getting those skills such that when you're on console, you'll be able to execute, that mission. But it is more than that. And we think every day, internal to ourselves, we talk, what is a space warrior? What is it to be a guardian? It's not just, you're separated from the rest. You're in this elite branch called the U.S. Space Force. It's much more than that. And so I'll read off the mission of Space Delta One. To develop guardians to dominate in competition and conflict through a career-long continuum of innovative basic military, initial skills, and advanced training courses, as well as Space Force and joint exercises. So it is more than just basic training. It's more than just what we used to call undergraduate space training at Vandenberg, which is now gateway training. I'll get into that a little later. But it is those exercises whereas you really see the fire start to come out, right? And I think, when sometimes, we can write down and we can try to define, we can try to engineer the culture, and that's necessary. But I think you don't really start to see those true attributes coming out until you see the Guardians on console performing the operations against simulated adversaries. And so to some degree, it is evolving, but I can say we're seeing it. I will also say that when you look at the Guardian ideal and the space warfighter mindset, and I ask the Guardians, I say, you're here to receive that training, to get the fundamentals, to get those advanced skills, but it's not sufficient. And to some, they get it right away, right? Because they understand, I have a certain background, a certain experience. Maybe I came from Indiana where there's maybe not a big Space Force presence, but they're like, hey, I want to be something bigger than myself. I want to defend this nation and what we stand for, and I want to go into space. I want to be part of defending our way of life and specifically our space assets. So they come with that, not knowing a lot much more. Their eyes are really opened when they get to Vandenberg and go through the gateway training, and we start training them, not just those fundamentals, but we bring them into the classified arena and share with them our classified capabilities. Share with them the adversary classified capabilities. And their eyes start to open. And you start to see, this is on. This is serious. And you start to see Guardians develop that warfighter mentality. And then I just like to ask them, why are you here? And oftentimes I get, well, based on my experience, this is, what motivated me. Maybe I saw some space movies. Maybe I was there and watched the DART, right? And that is motivating. And we need to continue doing that stuff. But a lot of times the Guardians think that they're in their initial skills training to learn skills. And I said, yes, but why? And a lot of times we meet with them early on in their training. They haven't had the adversary threat briefings yet, so they don't fully appreciate that we're here because of the adversary. And the protection and defense of our space capabilities is number one. Why we exist, why we have a Space Force, why we have a STARCOM, why we have Space Delta One, to focus every day on that. And so I can't, other than what's been documented and the studies and reports that we have, I can't say more than that as to what the space warfighting mindset is, but we're starting to see what it is as it develops.
Thank you, sir. General, over to you.
Thanks, Stephen. First, certainly want to pass my thanks also to Mandy and to Patty and y'all's teams. Everybody put this together. This is great. And the panelists, being here with Chief Simmons is an honor after as long as we've known each other, but just met Mr. Toso, I think the same. And General Bratton, thanks for leading the team of Guardians here today. I live life without many regrets, but the fact that I never got to be a Guardian is one of them. So it's great to see all of you guys here. My view on the question has probably changed a little bit just over time for me. spent most of my 34-year career as an Air Force space officer, and thought about warfighting. We were talking about warfighting. You know, we were beginning to use things like GPS integrated in with tactical operations on the ground. I had a chance to be deployed as a Director of Space Forces at CENTCOM, and we were really thinking about in a combat zone applying what we did at Air Force Space Command and STRATCOM at the time to terrestrial operations. Had a chance to be the Space Commission staff member working mostly on the space culture work that the Commission did. So but to be honest, I'm still learning. I wrote a paper for the National Security Space Association on space warfighting culture just a few years ago. And just like my views have changed, I think what this is not going to, it's not going to be here on Monday. It is a journey that we're on. And I'm very proud of the team that's doing it. It is a lot easier to sit and talk about it when you're not having to do it anymore. But I'm pleased to talk about it. If I were going to answer the question today, maybe I'll feel differently about it even in a few months. I think space warfighting ethos and mindset often has been thought to be or translated to be the things that happen in operations. But we even heard in some of the work we've done in the last few years, talking to Guardians that weren't in SPOC, or maybe not in parts of STARCOM. I don't really see myself as a warfighter. You know, I'm an acquisition person, or I'm an R&D person, I work in the lab. And I could see that because perhaps the way we've articulated has sort of focused warfighting culture was what happens on the pointy end of the operational sphere. But if you think strategically, which is, we should all try to do that the best we can, this is about competing with, and if we need to defeat our adversaries. So we created the Space Force. If the Air Force Space Command and the Air Force approach was good enough, we wouldn't have needed to create the Space Force. We could have fixed acquisition. We didn't need a Space Force to fix acquisition. We didn't need it to do a lot of things, but I think we needed it to create the culture that recognizes that we're not just in economic competition, but we are in military competition with adversaries. We need to create this service so that we can defend our country through this domain. And just as General Bratton said earlier, make sure whether it's assuring the delivery of space support to terrestrial forces or making sure that we can defend our assets in space, that we can take the fight to the enemy when needed, or we need to do broader missions like helping prosper, our country prosper deeper in space. That's why we have a space service. So I think the big change in my brain has been thinking about those attributes that General Raymond, as the chief, has put out in many of these his strategic documents, which I think are really well written, whether it's our capstone doctrine. I keep saying I still feel like it, but it's our capstone doctrine, or it is planning guidance, or the vision for a digital service, you name it. The sort of the principles of the culture for the Space Force are laid out there. But I think the real light bulb is that I think that means the whole service needs to embrace that and function as a collective group. It's not broken down by AF specialty codes. It's not broken down by functional communities. It's not broken down by the headquarters and the field commands down into the deltas. It's figuring out how do you actually create a culture across the fabric of the organization that embodies those principles, and you begin to see the organization, and I think organizational culture begin to match that. And I think that is a journey. Again, that will take a while, but you can probably measure, there was a question that earlier in the remarks, sort of how do you know when you're getting there? Well, I don't know what the end state looks like, but if our adversary's rate of maturity and growth looks like this, we created this service so that we look like this. And so we can't be patient enough to be flat or have a very low slope. We need to be realistic about how long it takes and how hard it's going to be, but impatient about the rate of change at scale across the Space Force. And so I think about it more that way these days, Stephen, so I appreciate the question. And I think the team here is the right ones. And by the way, it's not just those that have Guardian on their label. It is understanding the connective tissue of this service with the other services, with the other parts of government, with industry. I don't necessarily think they have a warfighting culture, but this organization, our culture, needs to be, I think, expert and knowledgeable and able to maneuver in those other communities, because it's part of scaling across more than just inside the service as well. So anyway, I think we're going to get there because of the people I still see wearing the uniform or the Guardian uniform, even for the civilian uniform. So it's exciting to watch what you guys do, what you do.
Thank you all. The first pointed question will be to Chief Simmons. So, given your former vantage as the command chief of the Joint Task Force Space Defense over at SpaceCom, and now your current role as senior enlisted leader at SPOC, how have you seen Guardians evolve culturally to meet the adversarial threats over the nearly 3 years that the Space Force has been operational?
That's a great question, thanks. I think once the Guardians in year one got over the excitement, we really started to focus in on experience. That is the critical change that I think that I've seen is a commitment to excel in experience. For decades, and for certainly throughout my time in space operations, the age-old question has been, in development, should it be breadth or should it be depth? Which do I need? And most mentors turned and said, yes. Breadth or depth? Yes, please. I believe there's a concerted effort in the Space Force today to swing towards depth. Breadth within depth, but excellence and expertise. And that is critical. I don't believe that our Guardians want to be dabblers, touch and goes. I believe our Guardians came into the Space Force to be at the tip of the spear in expertise, subject matter expertise. Regardless of what your space power discipline is, regardless of what your major is, cyber, intel, space, acquisitions, engineering, being the very best at what we do is the culture shift I think I'm seeing in our Guardians. Not coming in to be average, not coming in to just try things, but to be developed and to be expected to be the very best at what they bring to the table. That is certainly what China's doing. They are certainly not developing dabblers. They are developing to try to dominate. And I believe that our Guardians know that in order for us to dominate in space warfare, that we can't be dabblers. We have to be doers. That takes time. That takes training. That takes tenacity. It's a long game. And that is one of the challenges we have within our culture, is creating enough interest to stay put long enough to become great. If you've ever read the book, The Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, he says it takes 10,000 hours, 10 years of practice to be good at something. And I believe our Guardians want to be practitioners. I believe our Guardians want to be outliers. They want to be great at something. And so what our challenge is, I believe, is to invest enough time into the Guardian and expect enough of that in return so that they can live to their fullest potential, that greatness of expertise as practitioners. I believe our Guardians want to be sound technicians in the disciplines of space. And they want to be sound tacticians in the design of the space domain. And each of those things take time. I believe that that's where our culture is swinging to. What I've seen over the last 3 years of the Space Force and U.S. Space Command is an expectation from both the Space Force and the command, and from the Guardians and the airmen assigned for expertise.
Thank you, Chief. I'll direct my next question to Mr. Toso. First off, congratulations on the recent graduations of the first two all-guardian instructor-led basic military training courses. And sir, kind of building off of your response to the definition of space warfighting culture, you mentioned a number of other things, obviously, that Delta One is going after in terms of its training kind of portfolio, if you will. But beyond those that you mentioned, are there other kind of notable upticks in Guardians becoming more warrior-minded? And if so, which it sounds certainly like there is an uptick given Chief's response just now, what do you think has most contributed to those increases?
Yeah, so a couple things first off. First, thank you, Chief. We exist in training space warriors largely for SPOC, right? Yes, also for other elements, but largely for SPOC. And so getting that feedback is so important. And everything that we need to be doing is making sure that we're doing the right training and instituting that right culture. And this is a long game, right? And so I appreciate that. Got to spend just a minute on BMT. I mean, when's the last time this ever happened, right? I mean, and I can't take any personal credit for this, right? I've been in the job since February. And so a lot of people have been working really hard to make that happen. And I think about what was it like for a Guardian at BMT just a year ago? Well, you had a couple of Guardians in a flight full of airmen. What was that like? Well, and sports analogy. Imagine you're a college basketball team, and it's fall time, so that's fall ball, right? You're doing your workouts, you're getting your strength and conditioning, you're starting to get your running legs and your endurance, starting to run some plays, getting your jump shot back. And so what if, here it is, August, well ahead of the season, and you take a couple of basketball players, put them on the volleyball squad. A couple of basketball players, put them on the cross country. A couple of them with the football team, and so on. And then, a week before the season starts, all right, let's come together, guys. All right, let's go. We got our first game coming up. There is no chemistry. They aren't even basketball players, right? I mean, they may have gotten some conditioning, and that's good. They're athletes. But, those with the cross-country team, they can probably run a little faster than they could. Those with the football team, they're probably bulked up a little bit, which is good. Get manhandled under the hoop. But they're not playing like a team. They don't have that basketball spirit. They're going to slap down the other team. They are not ready. They're not ready. So, even at the high school level now, you train with your team year-round, right? You start with them. You run summer, unorganized workouts, fall ball starts, you're out doing scrimmages, you're in fall leagues, and you are a team, and you're ready to fight come that very first game. So that's what we've done with BMT, right? We've added 35 hours of space-specific curriculum and culture, and all you're with your peers that you're going to fight with. And so that's extremely important. And the patching ceremony. Anybody seen the patching ceremony that goes along with that? And it just happened at OTS, right? Officer Training School. I mean, this thing is like fire. And it's really important. It's starting to instill what it means. So, where else have we seen it? So, I've seen it in a couple areas in particular. And it's not so much when I sit in the classroom. And I do that. I'll walk across campus, sit down, and they'll be giving a lesson on something. I want to see what's going on. I want to see how the students are responding and see the questions that come up. I don't see that war fighting mindset so much in the classroom being a lecture. Where I see it is in capstone exercises. Where I see it is at Space Flag. Where I see it is at Black Skies. Where I see it is at the weapons school in Wizen. And probably the thing that warmed my heart the most, when I went with the commander, Colonel Schramm, out to Nellis for the weapons school integration exercise, and you got a handful of space guys. I think it's about less than 20 total students for 6 months there attending the space weapons school. And that culmination exercise where they're fully integrated with air, land, sea operations. And the night before, we're simulating the space fight. And that's great. We're up and we're watching them do the fight, and they have a mission. They're doing mission planning, executing, and assessing. And then the next morning, you go into the briefing room, and one of the first guys to get up to brief is the space guy, non-kinetic effects. And he's briefing, we took down the enemy SATCOM, and we defended our space ISR. And to see pilots in the room stand up and cheer. Yeah, you're not just flying GPS anymore. You're war fighting. And that spirit of those students, and to see that pride, that, yeah, I'm contributing to the joint war fight. And to see the rest of the members of the other weapons schools appreciate that and understand how that affects. Now I can fly my mission and drop my bombs with a much higher probability of survival. And they appreciate that. So that's one thing. The other thing I think is, I'll say as we have the opportunity to greet new students coming to Vandenberg, have brown bags with them, and then ultimately spend some time with them and their parents at graduation and talk to them. All right, are you excited now? What are you ready to go out and do? And to see that fire starting to burn, to know that they are going to contribute to defending this nation. We're starting to see that. And so why? What's contributing to this? Well, I think some of it is the organization that we have set up, right? We have designed this opportunity, and we are instituting this culture at basic training, initial skills, advanced training, and every exercise we have to broaden that opportunity, because, you know, when we did Black Skies at Vandenberg last month, and it received a lot of press, it was the first time some operators pulled the trigger on their EW capabilities and blackened the skies, if you will. First time. I'll bet you they feel much more like a warfighter now than they did before that exercise. And now they go back with that competence, with that depth of experience as a space electronic warfighter. So we're seeing it more and more every day, and we're looking to expand those opportunities. Red skies, blue skies, Polaris hammer, more, such that more of the space warriors will be able to get out there. And as the General said, it's not just space operators, right? It's not. We're looking to bring in the space intelligence professionals into these exercises also. We are looking to bring in the cyber professionals into these exercises as well. And in practice, the way we're really going to fight. This is not disintegrated, right? It's all together. So we're working to bring that more and more. Less by cards, right? Bring in the real disciplines. And that does extend to SSC, acquisitions, and engineering, and sustainment, and launch. We are working to integrate all of those activities as well. That's not easy. So we're kind of starting with what is most important, the operations to protect and defend, and then extending out from there. The other thing I think is setting expectations. As the chief said, we're setting expectations that you're starting your career as a space-minded warfighter, and we expect that. If you recruit somebody and you say, Yeah, you're just gonna be around for in case we need you. I don't know. Maybe you'll go, sit on the ops floor, maybe you'll not, but no expectation of ever needing your skills. Now you're gonna get what you asked for. And so we're setting that expectation. And finally, I think deliberate talent management is making a big difference. Training, education, deliberate assignments and opportunities. When we talk to these guardians about what their aspirations are and try to align them, as General Bratton said, what the service needs are, and with a small force, really try to get to know our guardians as a person and trying to align those skills, desires, abilities with the need, we're starting to see more buy-in.
Thank you, Mr.
Can I
Toso.
add to that?
Absolutely.
We have time for just a moment.
Want to correct the record?
No, I don't. I want to amplify something is, we are sending guardians through advanced scenarios, and we are sending them through threat-based training opportunities, and they are developing the space warfighting mindset and ethos through those repetitions. The challenge is not so much how the guardian sees themselves. We're working on that. The challenge is, how does everyone else see the guardian? Right? How do you see a Marine? How do you see a soldier? How do you see a sailor and an airman? There's a clear picture in your mind of a warfighter because you've seen it in action, because the service was born in conflict. How do you see a guardian? How does the neighbor, and we talked about that earlier, how does your family see a guardian? And how do we change that mindset left of a Space Pearl Harbor, left of a Space 9/11, left of understanding what it's like to go a day without space? That's the challenge. It's not so hard to raise up our talent to understand that they are more than enablers, more than providers, more than utility products and services, that they are an effect on the battlefield. We can do that day in and day out. But without the tangibility of seeing the gun smoke and the tank rattle and the fleets at sea, how does the public see the Guardian? Because that reputation matters. When you go home and look in the mirror, how did someone see me today? And when we can start to articulate as a public, as a nation, as a globe, you see a Guardian walking down the street and say, thank you for keeping us out of the harm's way and for protecting our way of life from changing. That is where the mindset will sit in.
Outstanding. So final question for the panel. I'll direct it first to the General. General McLaughlin, throughout your military career and now into retirement, you've influenced and stayed very close to space warfighting culture. As he mentioned, you've authored a number of thought leadership pieces on the topic. And based on what you've been tracking, and based on the comments and points made today on the panel, where specifically would you recommend that the Space Force and the broader defense enterprise kind of double down on Guardian and space warfighting mindset?
Thanks. Again, a great question, and even my answer shaped to some degree just from what I've heard today. I think I would double down or focus in a couple of areas. One, if I was going to continue a little bit of the theme, I would make sure every Guardian sees themselves. We talk about the Marine. It's not just the Marine. You could say soft special operations warrior or others, but there are many cultures where they start off with the broad thing that they are, but who they are. Even within the Marines, they have millions of specialties and all kinds of people that are really good at what they do. And they don't lose that. But they also know how to come together in a Marine Air Ground Task Force. Or you go to an Air Expeditionary Wing training event at Nellis or for real, and you have all these specialties. You have fighter pilots and intel people and air battle managers and space and cyber. You have the maintenance crew. You have all these folks, but they come together and they begin to train not just to be really good at their thing, but they train to be part of this force that has to come together in some way so they can deliver integrated air power. and at least in my day, that's what we called it. Those types of things are good lessons for guardians to think about, and I think, so you don't think, well, I'm an operator, I'm a SPOC person, or I'm a trainer. Those are all maybe things you do, but if you think about that, I'm a guardian, and I identify with this broader mission. I think that's one thing I would just double down on, that understanding, so that, and then come up with events, whether it's STARCOM training events, you've listed a bunch, or it's things that SPOC does in its day-to-day task force organization for how it might work, or it's things where field commands think about how they might task organize against issues where science and technology and acquirers and others see where they play and the ability to bring warfighting capability through the development, acquisition, and fielding cycle faster than our adversary, connected in with that. It's all part of this view that we're here to compete, and the consequences aren't, we go out of business, the consequences are our nation loses. That's the difference between a military service and warfighting than it being, something else. That's one thing I would double down on. I think there's so many opinions, both in the press, each of us might even have them, where it becomes a little bit of white noise in the system about what the issues are. There's millions of opinions. People will spout off. I might do it myself about, this is the issue. I think the chief and the service have laid out pretty well sort of what the attributes of the Guardian warfighting culture are, their documentation. I think one thing I would double down on is be very clear to all Guardians. These are the ideals. We're willing to update them and change them. We'll listen to you. But this is what it is. We're not going to be debating them every day. And we're going to expect you to live up to these, and we're going to hold each other accountable for it, from the chief down to a brand new session coming out of basic training. And I think sort of beginning to see that coherence around those ideas, and again, holding ourselves accountable at all levels to do that, I think is important. Does it mean maybe it's a journey you never finish. So but there needs to be an impatience about the rate that we're getting there, that we're always pushing hard to get there as fast as we can. I think the last part is maybe the opposite of that, and that is be realistic. The service is getting a lot of money. Budget's grown, 60% since the first year we had a Space Force budget. That's a big growth. And it's still small, but we're adding people. There is a practical realization, sort of a need to under promise, over deliver at scale, because things are realistically hard. It takes 20 years to build a 20-year experienced Guardian. It doesn't take 2 years, it takes 20 years. So these things take time, but what we don't want to be, as y'all mentioned, I was on the Space Commission staff. We talked about a lot of this now over 20 years ago. And then we sort of fell away and didn't do very much of it at all. And 20 years later, when we kind of ramped back up, have the Space Force discussion, from my perspective, we had lost a generation of opportunity, a generation of people. We can't lose a generation here. So there's, on one hand, be realistic. Don't expect things that they're flat not possible, because we have to violate physics and things. But so be realistic, but then at the same time have such high expectations of what our people will do, and be willing to trust them. And be willing to say, this command by negation, delegate till it hurts. That doesn't mean that you let a 20-year-old Guardian decide whether I'm going to war or not. Sometimes we take these to ludicrous extremes. That's not what it means. What it means is, just like I've seen this in the Israeli Defense Force, young people, if given authority and responsibility and accountability, will amaze you with how fast they learn and how well they do things, and how, especially the young generation today, how willing they are to work across boundaries where in my generation, we sort of stayed in our own little lane. I think the last thing I would say is hold them accountable, push as much as we can down to our smart folks, let them have a voice. But again, doesn't mean they get to decide we're going to war. But it's not like, hey, this is like your union dues. You got to wait till you're a journeyman, after you've been an apprentice, and then you can speak. That is a little bit of the way the culture worked where I grew up. Is you didn't even get in the room till you've been there 10 years, and then for 5 years, you got to sit on the outside and not speak, and, eventually you were lofty enough to be able to have an opinion. I don't think that's the way it needs to work for Guardians, and I'm not saying it is working that way. I'm just saying accelerate that. Those are a few of the things I'd probably double down on. But there may be 10 others, but those are the ones that kind of came to mind as I was thinking about your question.
Thank you, General. Any other comments from the?
Well, you're looking at it. I'll have something to say. It's really hard to follow General McLaughlin, but the thing that I would double down on is the influence of the inter-service transfers that were not from the Air Force. So we have a ton of soldiers, sailors, Marines that have come into the Space Force that have received the benefits of space effects on the other end. And they can articulate what space brings to the warfight now to the ops floor each and every day. And they can influence the decisions of our Space Force leaders in ways that maybe those that were inherited from the Air Force Space Enterprise from a benign time don't see things in quite the same way. And so if we double down on really turning the volume up on those inter-service transfers from other than Air Force services, I believe that we start to shape a warfighting culture, a warfighting mindset that isn't adopted from simply the Air Force or over-influenced by the Air Force. The Air Force is phenomenal. I spent 20 years in the Air Force because it's phenomenal. But I understand that this is different, and it needs a different approach. And I believe that those inter-service transfers from the other services give us an opportunity to shape a culture that's relevant to the rest of the joint warfighters.
Thanks so much, Chief. I want to take a moment again to thank our panelists. Just a tremendous discussion, rich discussion.